Hey, man.
Hey, man.
Hey, still here.
Yeah, been drinking Mountain Goat for a week. Drink responsibly. Anyway, what's been happening this week, guys?
What hasn't been happening
Wow.
this week?
So this week, opposition leader Bill Shorten's announced a new Labor policy that they want to see 50% of their MPs women by 2025.
Now, this is putting a lot of pressure on the coalition because they have a really small female representation across the whole parliament. In particular, in cabinet, there's only 2 female ministers.
And it puts the coalition in a really awkward position because they're kind of fundamentally opposed to the idea that you'd select women as part of a quota. So the LNP believes that whoever their candidate should be the best person for the job, but unfortunately it's quite often the best man for the job.
We've also seen this week that the ALP has said they want to see 50% of all of Australia's electricity generated by renewable sources by 2030.
So Bill Shorten has announced this as part of his emissions trading scheme policy, which he keeps reiterating is not a tax.
Now, before the 2010 election, the Gillard government had said that they would not introduce a carbon tax. However, due to their forced alliance with the Greens after the hung parliament, they had to implement a carbon tax. And Tony Abbott really rode to a victory in the election off the back of using the tax.
Yeah, so this policy, climate policy, has really haunted Labor over the last few years, but it's really great to see that they're getting back on the bandwagon. So we've seen a lot in the news this week, the TPP. Do you want to talk about it?
So the TPP stands for Trans-Pacific Partnership, and it's a big free trade deal between 12 countries, including Australia, Japan and the US. And it's days away from being completed after 10 years in the making.
So free trade agreements are designed to make it cheaper for countries to buy and sell goods with each other by removing things called import taxes. So basically that's like a little chunk of profit that the government takes off imported goods from other countries and makes it more expensive for consumers and also more expensive for businesses to produce overseas. So let's say I'm Japan and you're Australia and we need more sugar. We might go to you, hey Australia, we want to buy your sweet, sweet sugar. And we're going to do that and we're going to knock off our import tax to do that. So you can send us your sugar really cheap and we'll buy it. And that's really cool. You become like our sugar daddy. But in return, we might ask you to knock off import taxes for Japanese cars. And it'd be really good for Australian consumers because you'll get cheaper Japanese cars. So it's kind of a win-win situation.
Now, while that sounds really good in theory, we actually don't know an awful lot about the details of the deal because the negotiations are being done in secret. The reason they do these kind of deals in secret is because every little move that's made in a free trade agreement has the ability to make or break an industry in all of the countries concerned. So for instance, if the Japanese car manufacturer was to sit at the table of the free trade agreement and help bargain a deal, they're going to be looking after their own interests. And if all the actors involved were able to do this, nothing would ever get done.
And the other thing is that these documents, even though we can't actually see them, they are worded in really, really complicated legalese. So ordinary people, while we don't have access to it, even if we did, we wouldn't be able to understand it. And that has some really serious implications. So let's talk about the winners and losers.
Well, Australia's economy is very much an export-based economy in terms of the big profit-generating industries such as mining. So free trade agreements in that sense are really good for Australia. Our relationships with countries like Japan, the US, etc. is really important, and it's really important that we can export to those countries to make sure that our economy continues to be prosperous in the future.
Right, but it does come with some really big trade-offs, and one of my big concerns is the extending drug patent protections in the TPP. So at the moment, if a big pharmaceutical company comes up with a new wonder drug, they will own the chemical formula to make that drug, and they'll have the sole right to make it for a couple of years. So you've effectively got a situation where you've got one chemist who has the right to make a drug that's people are relying on to stay alive, and they can charge whatever they want for it. One of the clauses in the TPP plans to extend is this patent period. So they want to make it longer and make it harder for other businesses to make the drugs and to compete to bring down the prices. So it's a really big concern for Australians.
There's also concern amongst the agricultural sector in Australia. Now, for the TPP to pass, it has to go through Parliament still, and a number of the Nationals MPs who are the agricultural sector of the coalition have said that they're not going to support the TPP because it directly conflicts with their role in supporting farmers, in particular sugar farmers from Queensland. So there's big ramifications for the government. So this week, Jax tweeted us asking what is an ISDS clause?
So ISDS stands for Investor State Dispute Settlement, and it's part of the TPP. The idea behind this clause is that it protects companies and businesses if a government decides to take over a part of business. So in the 1960s, a whole lot of African governments decided they were going to take over the country's coal mines and take them back for the public. And a lot of mining investors were quite understandably pretty pissed off about that. So this is called direct expropriation. It's like a bit of a wanky word, but basically the idea behind it is that it gives investors a legal avenue to argue with the government that isn't inside the country's own legal system, where they're obviously not going to get a fair trial.
But the big problem within the TPP is something also big wanky word called indirect expropriation. And that's where the business doesn't actually have to get shut down in the country. They've just got to be able to prove that they might have lost some profit because of a law in the country. So we're seeing that at the moment with Philip Morris, which is a big tobacco company that's based out of Hong Kong. They launched legal action against the Australian government a couple of years ago when the plain packaging laws came in because they said that was a breach of their intellectual property.
Yeah, and the Australian government's already spent $50 million of taxpayers' money, that's our money, on fighting this case under the ISDS clause. And that's a really, really big problem for democracy because the government's got a financial incentive to make laws that favour private businesses rather than the health and the well-being of its own citizens.
Send us your dumb questions. I'm Brendan Wrigley.
I'm Harriet Conron. Join us next week for Politics at the Belleville.